but the idea that having one trans woman in a swimming meet is unacceptable. But I don't care if I wrongly sent, but but I don't care. But you don't care, apparently, if we wrongly sent one person to a concentration camp in El Salvador.
Piers Morgan had a rare instance on his show, Piers Morgan Uncensored, in which he had a panel where two people went against his views. And those two people were Tim Miller of the Bulwark and progressive commentator Kat Abu. They went up against MAGA lunatic Vincent Oshana, aka Vinny Oshana from the Patrick Bet-David show, and conservative commentator Elizabeth Pipko. In this segment from the debate, we're going to take a look at this panel discussing two of Piers Morgan's favorite obsessions, trans people in sports and crapping on Democrats. So we're going to take a look at these clips from Piers Morgan Uncensored. I will share my thoughts on this as well. Let's check it out together.
Tim, I agree with you.
We're not China.
Listen, I don't disagree with you about the due process issue. And Elizabeth, what I would say, I think, against the pro-Trump argument on this is that if you start to play loose with due process, what happens, as Donald Trump is now realizing, I think, is that the stories become the stories which are about due process, not what's happened on the southern border. There is a clear, demonstrable big success on the southern border, but I'm not reading or seeing anything about that. All I'm hearing about are these one or two isolated people who have not been afforded due process and where it looks unfair. And my point about that is that it's almost handing a victory to the jaws of defeat if you abandon due process. What do you think of that argument?
I mean, I have a lot to say in general, but can I just ask you, Piers, do you genuinely believe that the mainstream media that we've talked a bit about now for the last 15 minutes would have given Donald Trump the win and actually written about the victory at the border, regardless of what else was happening in the country? Do you believe that?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I think that's part of the problem. I think part of the problem with Donald Trump, well, part of the problem with Donald Trump from day one, in terms of the way the media have treated him, is that they have failed to understand why he got elected. He got elected because he's not a conventional politician. He doesn't behave like a conventional politician. So the Trump hysteria raged away for 4 years the first time. This time round, we were told it's going to be different. Everyone's learned their lessons, and they haven't. The hysteria has blown up again about absolutely everything. Now, I've just been in America for a month. It's sort of every morning's like a jungle of everyone going bonkers about everything Trump says and does. When actually, as with all things Trump, it's better to take a bit of time and see how things play out, because I think that's what he does. I think he throws stuff up against the wall. He sees what sticks and what works and what doesn't work, what needs changing and so on. But the problem with the kind of controlled chaos strategy that Trump deploys is that he does allow his opponents, his enemies, and I include quite a lot of people in the media who really do want to take him down. Even now, you can see it. It gives them a chance and an excuse to do that. And it takes away from the successes. And I think on tariffs and stuff like that, I can see the big picture. I think most people understand the big argument and don't disagree with it. It's the way he's gone about this. He has to get some wins on the board, because otherwise, if in 6 months' time or a year's time, or as you head towards the midterms, the US economy is still in the doldrums and the stock market is still tanking, then you're going to lose the House in the midterms and the environment will change completely. So I do think there's, he's playing with fire here with this stuff, where he's got to get wins on the board. Do you accept that?
I accept that, but I would argue that Donald Trump, obviously, as you know, is fully aware that midterms are coming up and maybe is acting like a president and not a politician worried about midterms. Not everyone can be Joe Biden and try to erase student loan debt a couple of weeks before the midterms to try to score themselves a win, for example, right? Maybe that's not what Donald Trump is trying to do. I think the fact is we're talking here, no one is being honest. That's why I brought up the dinner to begin with, and the fact that they sat there and applauded themselves and lied again. My fellow panelist here said that, whatever Steve Bannon does is the same. Number one, I don't agree. But Steve Bannon goes out and says, I am a Trump supporter. No one at NBC or Axios or Politico or anywhere else goes out and says I'm a Biden supporter. I saw Jake Tapper a few weeks ago say I'm not on the left. And I sat there with my jaw on the ground. Yeah. The fact is, they believe that they are actually moderates. They believe they're telling the American people the truth, and they believe they're getting away with murder because they continue to throw their own bias into everything else that they report. The American people are not stupid. What is sad is that the journalists in our country believe that they are. They believe they can tell them how to vote, how to feel, and they will not be able to do the research for themselves. Donald Trump is not worried about victories in the media because he knows the American people not only elected him to do what he's doing, but can figure out what he's doing without, reading through a couple of headlines in the mainstream media. So no, I don't think he's worried about scoring a few wins because he believes he's scoring the exact wins he was elected to score.
Okay, Kat, the interesting sort of sideshow at the moment to all this is the battle for the heart and soul of the Democrat Party, who have got record low polling at the moment. You're seeing a number of people like Gavin Newsom, governor of California, steaming very fast to the middle ground, abandoning a lot of the more progressive woke ideology as he goes, pretending he had nothing to do with it. You're also seeing people like AOC, who are out there getting more and more support, but of course belong entirely to the progressive left. You've also got people like David Hogg, who says we've got to get rid of all these old timers. We've got to ripple up and get some new, young, fresh blood and thinking into the party, which I would completely concur with. When you see the likes of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and these others, you just think you've got to move on now, and you've got to find a new, coherent voice that's going to get people to vote for it and have a view for America. But it can't be the progressive left, can it? Haven't we just seen with the last election an utter repudiation of a lot of what the progressive left stands for? So if you end up with AOC as the standard bearer going forward, I think you end up losing again.
I want to pause here for just a moment before we get into what Katabu is saying here. So Piers Morgan is saying that the Democratic Party, and he says Democrat Party, and which the right loves to do. Piers Morgan always says that he's not on the right, that he's a liberal, but he's a so-called journalist, and he calls it the Democrat Party. But he says in one breath that the Democrats need fresh blood, younger people, but then he rails against younger people like AOC because she's woke. One of Piers Morgan's two obsessions. And we'll get into the other one here in just a moment. But he's against AOC, but also, in his mind, the reason that Kamala Harris lost was because she was too woke and too progressive, when I don't know anybody who's an actual progressive who thinks that Kamala Harris was progressive.
Frankly, I disagree. I mean, Harris, especially after the DNC, was campaigning with Liz Cheney, trying to present herself as like this moderate Nikki Haley, Kamala Harris voter that obviously didn't really exist, or at least not in huge numbers. I think what a lot of us call progressivism is really just common sense. I mean, my big vision for the world is that every American should afford housing, groceries, and healthcare with money left over to save and spend. And that doesn't seem like a very high bar, and it's not for any of our peer countries, but it is here. And neither party is truly messaging on that. I mean, you have on the right now, having tax cuts that benefit the super rich, but not the average American. And these tariffs will cost the average American, I think, about $4,000 every year. And as for Democrats, there are a lot of them that are more interested in their, corporate donors and trying to always cater to this very like milquetoast vision, when both parties should be going towards that idea. Housing, groceries, and healthcare with money left over to save and take your kid to the zoo or go to the movies.
But the reason people don't focus on those things or talk about them is that on the progressive left, you'll also have people at high levels of the party come out and say with a straight face, we think biological men should be in women's sport. And the moment most average Americans hear that, they do what you just did. They roll their eyes and go, you lot are insane. And you're doing it for a different reason. You're doing it because you think, I'm insane for saying that. But I can tell you, as somebody who's always been pretty liberal, I think that strategy was completely insane. The idea that you would let your leaders go out and propagate such bullshit, which most Americans with any vein of common sense, as you call it, know is bullshit, that then allows exactly what happened. The Republicans to run with that and say, look at these people, they're nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the Democratic Party has a messaging issue, but I think this is less about the Democratic Party and more about right-wing media, which I watch and analyze for a living, or at least before I started running for Congress. There's been plenty of research talking about when people transition, how it doesn't really impact their effects in sports. This is a very, very, very tiny percentage of the population.
No, it's complete bullshit. I'm sorry.
Can I please finish
by the way,
this?
I'm not right-wing media.
Nope.
In any shape or form.
I'm not saying you are.
But I'm just telling you, I'm not, and I think it's bullshit. The idea that it's a small thing, it's not. You're seeing it more and more and more and more and more. There are millions of people, young people in America identifying as trans. This problem is going to get worse and worse and worse. And the issue is about women's rights to equality and to fairness and to safety. Nothing more than that. It's not about trans people. I want the same, but just to be clear, I want the same. Hang on, Kat. I want the same for trans people, but not at the expense of women's rights. That's what it's about. And if you can't have a Democrat Party that stands up completely rock solid for women's rights, because it's far too concerned with promoting a trans agenda where it erodes women's rights, you're never going to get re-elected as a party, ever.
Okay, this is the thing. Trans people's existence, and even like the 40 people that are in sports, isn't the big issue with women's rights. It isn't a women's rights issue.
But it becomes one when you support obvious unfairness. That's the point.
Can I please finish?
Sure.
Thank you. The thing here is you have Republicans right now in the state, at the federal level, that are saying we need to check children's genitals to make sure they're the right ones before they play. That's a harm to children and women. The SAVE Act, which is going to stop millions of married women from being able to vote if they don't have their birth certificate and proof of their name change, that's an actual harm to women. Trans people existing, and in like one state that did a law against trans kids being in sports, there was literally one trans child that was in any sport who was supported by their own team. This is lawmakers at the state level, people that are being paid, that are full-ass adults, that are bullying children.
So just to be clear, so just to be clear, you would personally like it to continue. You think it's perfectly okay for biological men to compete in women's sport. Is that your position?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't mind trans women being in sports.
Okay. Then this is the problem. Then, Kat, with respect to you,
I beat them.
Kat, with great respect to you, I'm very glad you're not running this issue in America because it is grotesquely unfair to women. Vinny, final words.
Before we get into the insane ramblings of Vincent Oshana, I want to address what Katabu was saying here and what Piers Morgan had to say. Katabu is saying the Democratic Party has a messaging issue, and she is trying to talk about economic issues and saying that people should be able to afford a place to live and should be able to afford food, and I'm kind of putting words in her mouth, but should be able to afford healthcare and the rest. But unfortunately, Democrats or progressives or people on the left, whatever term you want to use, they go on shows like Piers Morgan Uncensored, and they have to waste time talking about non-issues like trans people in sports. And like she brought up, and has been brought up before on Piers Morgan show, we had in the state of Ohio where they wrote a law that affected one trans kid, one child in an Ohio school system. This is a non-issue that right-wingers, and yes, he's a right-winger, like Piers Morgan, constantly bring up over and over and again. And you see, Katabu talking about this. I've heard Tim Miller talk about this on Piers Morgan's show, and they say, this is a tiny problem. I believe it was 3 trans athletes who performed in the last Olympics. The NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association in the United States, has said that out of more than 500,000 student athletes, fewer than 10 of those student athletes are trans. So all the oxygen gets taken out of the room when Democrats or progressives or people on the left try to talk about real issues like economic issues facing Americans, because Piers Morgan and Vincent Oshana want to talk about nothing but trans people in sports. That is a tiny, tiny, tiny issue.
To you, then I'll come to Tim for his final word.
Well, she just said it. I don't like you're spitting out these numbers. If one man tries to take away a scholarship from a female, that's anti-woman. And for you to sit there and act like it's not a freaking problem, it's happening more and more, like Piers said, every single day. And that's the problem, is this low number talk. If one girl is being affected, and if there's men and women's bathrooms, you guys make it seem like we're just coming out of thin air. And that's the problem, Piers, with the Democratic Party. You heard it here first. No vision, no plan. They're totally fine with a male with testicles beating the shit out of women, spiking volleyballs in their freaking faces, sending them to the hospital. No. It's unbelievable that I'm happy you're exposing yourself, because he nailed it. This is why your party is going to keep losing over and over and over, because you guys are standing on issues that it's so common sense. Men should play with men. Women should play with women. And if you don't think it's affecting women, go ask all these girls that are losing scholarships to men with freaking testicles that are beating the shit out of them in sports.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable that you think like that.
Okay, Tim, I think, Tim, the wider part, I don't want to, relitigate the whole trans thing, but I think the point is, as the Democrats try and find a new voice, a new way to compete, and a new way to win, I just feel they have to go down the Gavin Newsom route of abandoning just propagating all this progressive far left stuff. Otherwise, they're just unelectable.
Yeah, so just two thoughts on this. Just one really quick on the moral bankruptcy of Vinny's position. I have a more nuanced view than Kat does on trans women in sports, but the idea that having one trans woman in a swimming meet is unacceptable, but I don't care if I wrongly sent, but I don't care, but you don't care apparently if we wrongly sent one person to a concentration camp in El Salvador. If we you don't care about due process. No. You said you don't care about due process.
Two different points. You're conflating two different points.
No, I'm not.
Two different points. Let me guess. And you're using the word concentration camp. Tim, you're using the word concentration camp. So you're one of those people that's like, Trump is Hitler. Again, your dumbass party has watered down the name Hitler. The name Hitler isn't even strong anymore. Because you know what? You compare him with Trump, people go, oh, if Hitler's like Trump, then he's not bad. Stop saying that, guys. That's stupid rhetoric. Concentration camp. You're an illegal gang member. Get the fuck out of my country. Period. You don't belong here. You have deportation orders. You're not supposed to be here. You beat your wife.
Okay,
Listen.
We've got, unfortunately, we have to wrap it there. All I would say is, Tim, in relation to your point, Tim, I actually think it is wrong to deport people to prisons in El Salvador without proper due process.
It's a much more
Well, Vinny, I have not seen yet enough evidence for my liking that this guy was a member of that gang. If there is,
why would you?
Hang on. If there
why
is,
do they have to show you?
If there is, put it out there. If there is, put it out there, and then I may change my mind. But until I see it, I'm afraid I'm not satisfied. I also think the trans issue
you guys think
is
that
important.
they're lying?
Well, let's wait and see.
Are they lying, Piers?
Let's wait and see.
Yes.
You guys think they're lying?
Well, no, Vinny, but initially, and just to be clear, the administration initially said it was a mistake. Their words, not mine. Anyway, we've got to leave it there. Yep. Great panel. Thank you all very much. I greatly appreciate it. We're going to move on to other subjects.
Take a breath, Vinny.
I love Tim Miller while this freaking lunatic Vincent Oshana is ranting and raving and screaming and turning beet red. Tim Miller just calmly saying, stop yelling, Vinny. Here's one thing that never gets said, and I would love to see somebody on one of these shows ask Vincent Oshana. I'm going to go out on the limb and say that before all the talk of trans athletes in sports, that Vincent Oshana didn't care even a tiny bit about women's sports. But I wish somebody on one of these shows would be like, all right, Vinny, who is your favorite women's volleyball player? And there's no way in hell that Vincent Oshana can name a college volleyball player who is a woman or any women's volleyball player, professional, past, present. So they don't really care about women's sports. They just care about being anti-trans and anti-trans people in sports. Again, it's not a real issue. Piers Morgan, Vincent Oshana, these other crazy right-wingers have made it a big issue that Democrats, progressives, people on the left constantly have to push back against. And it doesn't allow them to talk about real issues that really are affecting Americans' lives. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Do you agree with Tim Miller and Cataboo, or do you agree with Piers Morgan and Vincent Oshana and Elizabeth Pipko here? Let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. I'm Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.